Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and I'm back with another brand new episode with you all today. Hope everyone has been doing well and staying healthy and safe. I've been really getting back into the swing of things with announcing games again, which feels great, and it's the outdoor sports season, and the weather has been a little nicer here in Pittsburgh recently, so it's been a nice welcome back to work and whatnot, and there are some guidelines being lifted in Pennsylvania for COVID, so hoping things are on the up and up just around the bend here, and not to mention, opening day is creeping closer and closer, and getting into today's episode, I want to run through some things from spring training as usual to continue to get us ready for opening day, but I also want to give some first-time All-Star predictions and much more. So let's get into it, and I'll first jump right into the latest news going around the league, and also sharing a little insight into spring training and who's been performing well. Afterwards, I'll get into selecting the players who could be first-time All-Stars this year and who is on the verge of their first full breakout year. Later on, I'll get into another division grading of the offseason moves and acquisitions, as I'll give a grading of all the AL West teams and one of the divisions and one for the division as a whole as well. And be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into another buy it or deny it segment, as I'll share whether I buy or deny the idea that there will be no more than just one team from last year's championship series in the playoffs that will make it as far this year in the 2021 playoffs. So, a lot of things going on today, a jam-packed episode. We're going to run right through it, and I'm going to open the show with a topic that I'm going to go more in-depth on later in another episode in the coming weeks. But I want to get into the general idea of it and also what could be done to advance it forward, and that is the idea of Rob Manfred wanting to implement more rule changes during his commissionership and how he's expressed his desire to have that be kind of the main focal point of his time as the leader of the MLB. And I don't know if anybody has seen this, but recently there has been some news going around that the MLB is going to start using some of the minor leagues, kind of the different teams, to almost experiment with new rules and potential rule changes and this, that, and the other. So they're going to kind of I'll get into that in another episode. I'll unpack that a little bit more, but kind of just the general gist of what this is and what Manfred is trying to do. It was an article in The Athletic, great publication. If anybody is subscribed to it, I would highly recommend it. I believe right now it's a $1.99 for a month subscription or something. Great publication. But the article got into how Manfred is very, very dead set on wanting to change rules to baseball. He pretty much wants to modernize baseball. Now, Bud Selig, the former commissioner of baseball, was not a big fan of doing that. I think we can all kind of tell because there was not many rule changes being done while Selig was in office, but now Manfred is there, and he's trying to revitalize things. I mean, we've already seen it briefly with how he's been trying to, at first now he was trying to kind of increase the amount of home runs and the offensive production. Now they're trying to take a step back with that. So there's a lot of different things he's trying to do. We saw it last year in the pandemic season with the universal DH. We saw it with the expanded playoffs, minimum 3 batters faced by pitchers, so on and so forth. He's trying to basically put this game into a modern world. He's trying to put a little modern spin on the game. And he wants to make sure that the sport is entertaining while also keeping that winning idea amongst teams intact, really trying to allow managers and teams to still win and strategize baseball correctly, but at the same time do it through kind of a modern twist, if you will. Now, like I briefly mentioned, currently the minor leagues are kind of being used as an experiment to kind of see what is going on with the changes and whatnot. Many people do not like this because it's, again, the MLB kind of coming in, elbowing their way in and enforcing new rules without consulting any of these players, without saying, hey, is this okay with you guys? Without really consulting with any of the teams. And I was reading this article, and a lot of minor leaguers feel like they're kind of guinea pigs in this big experiment, and that, again, it's another instance where minor leaguers don't really have a seat at the table, and they don't really have a say in anything, and they're kind of the forgotten ones. And it is unfortunate. And I think that at times Manfred might be trying to do a little bit too much with baseball. And I think that's the beauty of baseball, right? It's a very unique kind of on its own little island sport, if you will. There's nothing quite like it. It's not, how you see these other sports where you can really run up the score big time and you have kind of these big offensive outings or whatever. Baseball is a thinking man's game. It is just absolute mental, and that's what it is. It's I believe there's some saying out there, some statistic that baseball is about 90% mental and 10% skill, just about. And it's true. It's a lot of it is thinking, strategizing, understand where guys are going to be moving, trying to position them accordingly. And if these rules that he's trying to change, if they are met with open arms, then they could become permanent changes. But if not, in one of the agreements, if a rule is not met on kind of an agreement base, and both sides, the players and the front office and the executives in baseball, agree on everything, and if they don't agree on everything, they have to wait a whole year to kind of come back and revisit that potential change. So if things don't work out in a season where he's trying to have a universal DH, then he's going to have to wait a whole nother year for that to actually get put into place. Again, I think that, first off, if Manfred is going to use the minor leagues like this, well, the least that they can do is maybe get a little bit better pay, right? I mean, they're already kind of getting the short end of the stick because they're not getting much money as it is, and they work tirelessly, probably even put in more hours than some people do at their regular day jobs on a 9-to-5 basis while they are in season. So minor league players, I feel like, are very disrespected in a lot of ways. And this is another instance, not getting much pay, but they still have to kind of play with these weird rules already with a pandemic season. And I've even seen that I believe the single A season, or maybe it was the double A season, it's already been postponed. It's been pushed back to, I believe, either later April or May or something like that. So it's going to be very interesting. It's going to be very, very interesting to kind of see what happens. I do think that it's going to take years, and I mean years, for any of these changes to go through, because players are going to have to approve this fully also, and there's going to be different ins and outs and incentives and things along those lines that people and players are going to have to realize and deal with. And if they don't like the kind of repercussions that could possibly come up, then they're not going to want to do it. For instance, the universal DH, and I've mentioned this before, DHs do not get paid as much as an everyday skilled position player does. They're not seen as a skilled position. So as a result, if that's a rule that is trying to be pushed through, probably not going to be pushed through, because players, again, until there's better pay for it, then they'll go ahead and do it. I will say, if any rules don't work, it could really stain his reputation completely. He'll be known as the guy that tried to do too much. He tried to mess with baseball and its uniqueness and its originality way too much, and as a result, he could lose people that have been supporters of the game for years, right? I think that baseball is a sport that, as time has gone on, and there's the reason why it's called America's pastime, is because there are some things that are a little bit outdated, or some rules or some kind of game scenario situations that are a little bit old school. But again, that's the beauty of baseball. That is the pureness and kind of the uniqueness of baseball. And I think that if anything, that's how you continue to keep people around. It's kind of grandfathers and fathers being big baseball fans. They pass it down to their children, and then so on and so forth, and it kind of goes on from there. And so I think that at times he's just trying to mess with something that should not be messed with. And again, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And I think that baseball is not broke at all. And I think that, yeah, there are some things that could change about it, but I would not go so far and say that there needs to be complete revitalization of the entire league and of the entire sport. So ultimately, I think that nothing drastic will happen anytime soon, but I could see maybe a couple tweaks in rules coming out, in the next couple years potentially, to maybe either speed the game up, quicken it a little bit, maybe try and minimize the amount of time and duration it takes for a game to be completed. But ultimately, I don't see many major rule changes being made. So getting out of that story and getting into this other story that I also found from The Athletic, and it was, again, a really wild story that I personally don't remember hearing the headlines, and I don't remember the headlines hitting the news. And the way the story said it, the way the story had said it was that, the news was really heavy and that everybody in baseball was talking about it. I don't remember this. Again, this was a couple years ago, so maybe it was something that stuck with me, but I didn't realize it until I read this article. But regardless, pretty crazy story involving Adam Laroche, who, again, is no longer playing, but also his son, Drake Laroche, and what all went down with him and the White Sox. So basically to give a little background, Adam Laroche and his brother Andy Laroche, their father played in the MLB, and their father was known for bringing both of them around the clubhouse. It was kind of, in a interesting way, the way that they grew up. It was just the situation that they were in. So Adam Laroche tried to do the same thing with his son, Drake. And Drake right now is, I believe, a freshman pitcher at a community college in Kansas. And he's actually one of the better pitchers on his team as only a freshman. And he's probably going to be a pretty decent baseball player from what people say. Adam Laroche had been known, again, to bring his son around. He'd bring him around the clubhouses where he played. And Drake was a very well-liked individual. He was well-liked by all of Adam Laroche's teammates. They respected him very well. They said that he was very respectful himself and polite. And they said that he was very mature. He was very mature for somebody his age. And I feel like Adam Laroche really kind of drilled it into him and said, hey, this is my job, this is my occupation. I know your friends at school will probably say, ooh, that's so cool. You get to go hang out with MLB players like your dad. You have to be completely business-oriented because this is people's profession, this is how they make money, and this is how they sustain a livelihood. So I'm sure he told him that at a very early age, and Drake Laroche clearly accepted that and was okay with it because a lot of things that I was reading was he would help coaches shag fly balls. You know, he would be the relay guy if a ball was coming in. He would basically be the one that was catching and giving to the coach to hit grounders or pop-ups. He was actually being helpful. If anything, he was, not doing anything wrong, and there was no signs of immaturity. There was never any issues like that. And when Laroche was with the Nationals, the team absolutely loved having Drake around. I mean, it was to the point where when Adam Laroche went to the White Sox, he pretty much convinced the White Sox to give the Nationals a call about Drake, and the Nationals had nothing but nice things to say about the kid. So, again, speaks a lot about who Drake was and who Drake is as a person, but also Adam Laroche and how he was as a player. He was also such a well-liked teammate that Laroche never really had anybody come up to him in person and say anything. So what happened was Laroche goes to Chicago. He signs a really big deal with the White Sox, and he wanted to make sure that his son would be allowed to come around the clubhouse. So he asked the club executives. He asked Ken Williams. He said, yeah, sure, that's no problem at all. Ken Williams seemed A-okay with it. All of the managers were all right with it. The team seemed okay with it. And there was actually a couple players that had played with Adam Laroche that were quoted in the story, and they were saying that they loved having Drake around. They felt that he was actually an important piece to their team and their clubhouse and their locker room. And that's a lot coming from professional baseball players, saying that about a kid that was, I think at the time, 14 or 15 years old. So, again, very, very impactful words. And initially, again, teammates welcomed with open arms. Players all really liked him. They were very impressed with his maturity. But then as time went on, Ken Williams started to get wind from unknown teammates and team personnel. The article did not really divulge all the details. I'm sure they probably don't have all the details on that either. But pretty much he was getting anonymous tips from people within the organization and the team saying that they did not feel comfortable with having Drake around. They would have rather not have Drake there. They felt that Drake was kind of a distraction, whatever it might have been. So they kind of had to deal with the situation. Williams went up to Laroche. He asked him to dial back bringing his kid around, and Adam Laroche immediately was not happy with that. You could kind of tell that, while reading the story at least, you knew it was going to go south very quickly. And Adam Laroche was not necessarily a guy that was hoorah-rah, yelling in your face, really intense. He was a very kind of even keel, never let his emotions get too high or low, regardless of how well he was playing or his team was playing, whatever. He was a very even keel guy. And he pretty much asked Williams for an immediate leave or immediate absence of leave. He said, I need to leave. I'm out of here. And this was all going on during spring training. And a lot of teammates were not happy with Ken Williams. And it actually got so out of hand that, and this is where things got really wild, because reading the story, I mean, you don't realize kind of what the reaction was going to be. Initially, you're thinking, okay, maybe a couple players were upset. All of the players almost banded together and basically like boycotted the game. Said, we're not playing because we didn't like what Ken Williams did, because he did it in the middle of spring training. And a lot of players felt that, okay, because it was a promise that Ken Williams had made with Adam Laroche. And so other teammates felt that, okay, if this guy is going to tell me X, Y, and Z, and he told Adam Laroche X, Y, and Z for his situation, and he just went back on his word with Adam Laroche, imagine what he's going to do with my situation. Could he be somebody that I do not trust? And as I started reading the article, though, I do remember little instances and glimmers, because they mentioned Chris Sale being suspended from the team and being fined for the destruction of property of the team. And I remember that pretty well because I remember saying, why in the world would you try and destroy the team that employs you's property? That doesn't make sense to me. Now it makes sense. And Chris Sale actually was one of the most outspoken people against Ken Williams, and it got so bad at one point that I guess the players were starting to leave the facility and they were starting to board the bus. And Ken Williams pretty much stopped all of them and said, if any of you boycott this game, we're going to have to issue out fines. And I guess Chris Sale had a very heated exchange with Ken Williams. And honestly, I'm not necessarily shocked by that. Because, again, it's kind of, as much as sports is an enjoyable, lovely, beautiful thing that I have loved my entire life, there is a business behind it. There's a business aspect. And I think that the business principle of how Williams went back on his word really did not sit well with a lot of guys. And it also kind of lines up well with how Chris Sale exited out of Chicago, was not very happy. There was other players that were very outspoken and said, we will pretty much say no to this game and we won't play. And the manager at the time had kind of left it up to the team, but he said, listen, let's be honest here, guys. We need to put this team together. We need to play. So, long story short, Adam Laroche eventually just retires, does not come back, forfeited $13 million, and that was kind of the grabber, if you will, and that was kind of the grabber in what was in the story. What really caught me was how it was $13 million he had walked away from, and he had no problem doing it. And I was like, well, I wonder what happened here. Did something go on with it? I mean, and so once you read the story, then you're like blown away that actually happened. So, again, to keep a long story short, there's no hard feelings between Laroche and Williams and the White Sox. Quite frankly, I think it was just an unfortunate situation that involved the kid, and it was a player's son, and I think that really didn't sit well with him. And at the same time, Laroche is just trying to be a protective dad. He's trying to make sure his son is being cared for and being, kept safe. And also, not to mention, it wasn't like the kid was being out of place or being disrespectful. I think that there were some speculation that new players, rookies, they didn't feel comfortable having him around, so it must have been new people that come around that were not happy about it. Regardless, though, a pretty wild story because I never realized that Adam Laroche would literally let his kid come to work all the time, and then there was a huge kind of big-time dramatic ordeal that involved the entire situation. So enough of that. I know it's, again, kind of a wild story, but just a little interesting side fact that I found. But I want to just wrap up the first segment here with a little bit of a spring training update and share any and all players and teams that have been doing particularly well the last few days at spring training. So looking at the standings again, Miami, they continue to play really, really well, quite frankly. 6-2 right now. The Yankees are 10-4 in the Grapefruit League in spring training, so they've been off to a really hot start. Toronto's 8-6, Atlanta's 8-6. The New York Mets are 6-5, but again, I think what the New York Mets are doing, and I've kind of witnessed it watching a couple of their spring training games, they seem to be trying out various individuals, and they're not obviously starting their entire starting team. I mean, some teams probably aren't even doing that. They want to give guys some time to rest and whatnot, and they don't want anybody to get hurt during spring training. But from what I've seen, the Mets are really trying to basically give opportunities to a lot of different guys, feel them out, see what they can and cannot do. And so, again, a lot of this should not reflect how they're going to be during the regular season because who knows? I mean, the Miami Marlins could arguably be one of the worst teams in baseball this year, and they're sitting atop the leaderboard in the Grapefruit League with a .750 winning percentage. So who knows? A lot of things can change. But going over into the Cactus League, the Royals continue to stay hot. They're 12-3 right now. The Dodgers, they're 8-4, followed by the Cubs, who are 7-5. Now, speaking of a former Dodger who is now a Cub, who's been playing exceptionally well, Jock Peterson continues to hit the ball very well down in spring training, batting .500 right now in 24 at-bats, 5 homers, 9 RBIs, a 1.780 OPS. Now, that is some heavy hitting, if you ask me. But again, let's face it, these baseballs are changing. Could we see guys like Jock Peterson suffer a little bit? That's what I'm going to be paying close attention to, guys like Jock Peterson, guys like Pete Alonso, who's hitting .364 right now in spring training with 2 homers and 9 RBIs and a 1.223 OPS. So that's another kind of instance where it's like, okay, that's a guy that hits really well. He's a big power bat. He's not that far removed from setting the rookie record for most homers in a season. But is he going to continue on with that type of production, right? I mean, let's face it, I'm sure his home run average was over 375 feet. Maybe some of those balls don't go as far as they would have before they changed the baseball. So something to really pay attention to. But continuing down the road, Corey Dickerson actually having a really, really good spring training, batting .333 right now. If the Marlins can keep him healthy, and that's kind of been the big thing with him the last couple years. Guy's 31 years old. I think he's still productive. I just think that he is injury-ridden, and he's just always, always, always in some sort of injury protocol. And I just wonder if it's really worth having him around, even if, again, he brings veteran leadership and so on and so forth. He's not a very productive player when he's not playing, obviously. But if he can stay healthy, different situation. Bobby Witt Jr. continues to play really, really well. He's actually batting also .333. Yohan Moncada batting .308, and Nolan Arenado's batting .304. Arenado's batting .260 about 2 weeks ago, so good to see his batting average up a little bit more. Now, getting into a couple pitchers that have been pitching pretty well, Adam Wainwright has been absolutely lighting it up on the mound. 1 ERA, a 1 ERA for the 39-year-old. Signed a one-year deal, coming back with the Cardinals for potentially a last season, who knows. But in his 3 games, he's gone 9 innings with 9 Ks, a .33 whip, so he's been great with keeping guys off the bags. He's been having a really, really good spring training. Then Jacob Degrom, 1.13 ERA. Max Scherzer at a 2.08 clip. That's a great sign for the Nationals. If you're able to see Scherzer humming this well early on in spring training, and if you can keep him healthy, because, again, you never know with Strasburg. Strasburg I feel so bad for, because I think Strasburg could have been one of the best pitchers in the last 10, 15 years. I don't think I would necessarily count him as that right now, simply because he's been so injury-ridden, and we haven't necessarily had that big dose of Steven Strasburg that I feel we have had with Max Scherzer or Justin Verlander, so on and so forth. So to have Max Scherzer doing really, really well, that's a great sign, because, again, then all you have to do is hope that Strasburg picks it up, and then this Nationals team is a lot scarier than I think people thought that they were going to be coming into this year, going back at the end of last year, right? I mean, the end of last year, they were terrible. One of the worst teams in baseball, and I think they've really picked it up in the last couple months. But again, we are literally 2 weeks away from spring training, and I cannot wait for that day, Thursday, April 1st. It's going to be a really good one, folks. But until then, that'll do it for us in this first segment. But don't go anywhere, because when I get back from the commercial break, I'll dive into selecting which players I think could be on the verge of having their first ever All-Star season, and what the likelihood is of their successful season happening this year. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA, to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenour with you all, and in our first segment, I jumped right into some news going around the league and also a spring training update as to what has been going on down in Florida. But be sure to stay right here with me for the final segment today, where I'll get into a buy it or deny it, as I'll discuss whether I buy or deny the idea that no more than one team from this past year's championship series in the playoffs will make it just as far this year in the playoffs. I want to now get into discussing which players could be, and most likely will be, first-time All-Stars this year, especially with a full season back up and running. Now, there's been a couple guys that I feel should have arguably been All-Stars in previous years, but again, due to COVID cancellations or just not having a whole lot of service time under their belt in previous seasons, they haven't been able to have the opportunity to be All-Stars. So, I want to get into a couple players that I think would be big-time selections for being possible first-time All-Stars. And one of those is Fernando Tatis. He's the first one on my list because, quite frankly, the guy signs a 13, 14-year extension, a $340 million extension, whatever it was. The guy's going to be the face of baseball for quite some time. He is going to literally be the face of baseball. He's that good. He's got the most home runs for somebody through their first 150 at-bats, or through their first 150 games, I should say. And he hasn't even played actually 150 games. He's played 143. That is the one thing, though, about him, is that he has not had a whole lot of time in the MLB, only played 84 games in 2019. He played 59 last year, so he actually played in just about every single game that you could have played in last year, minus one. And his numbers have been, I mean, again, they speak for themselves. He's got a career .301 batting average with a .956 OPS. He's been above 900 in each of the last 2 seasons in his early career. His OPS plus has been over 150, which, again, the league standard is 100, so he's topping that by 50 points in each season. And then his home run numbers have been astronomical. 84 games in 2019. He belted 22 homers and 53 RBIs with a .317 batting average. And in 334 at-bats, he only struck out 110 times. So, yes, a little bit of a higher strikeout rate than you'd probably like to see, but at the same time, he's still producing at such a high level. And then in 2020, 17 homers, 45 RBI. So he almost got to the same RBI total that he was in 2019, and he played in just about 20-plus fewer games in 2020. So he was well on the pace that he was in for 2019 in 2020, and so I think that's going to continue on for him this year. I definitely have him as a first-time All-Star. I could definitely see him putting up some serious numbers, not only this season, but moving forward. So I am definitely going to give him a nod for a first-time All-Star this year. So he's number 1 on my list. But the coming in number 2, and I think that, and I don't know why people don't give the amount of attention to this player that is given to Fernando Tatis. I don't understand why. I mean, they're just about the same age. They've been in baseball virtually about the same time. This player's been in it for 1 more year than Fernando Tatis has been in it, and that's Juan Soto. Juan Soto is going to be an All-Star this year, right? I mean, he has to be an All-Star. In all honesty, he should have been an All-Star in 2019. The guy batted 34 homers, 110 RBIs, and a .282 average with a .949 OPS. Those are staggering numbers. He was 20 years old when he was doing that, and that is my argument I make about Juan Soto and Fernando Tatis. That might be a topic for another day on the podcast as to who is going to be the bigger face in baseball. I think that Tatis has kind of this huge media image right now, and Soto doesn't have that. Soto doesn't have kind of a huge, he's not on a bunch of commercials. He's not in the mainstream market, if you will. Juan Soto is somebody that is going to just lace them up, go out and play. Fernando Tatis, he does the same thing, but again, he kind of brings a little bit of a flair with him, and I think that's what is so great about him, is that baseball needs players like that. They need guys that are going to be flashy. They're going to be kind of showy. His bat flips have become kind of this new phenomenon in baseball. That's Fernando Tatis, that is. And so I can see why people might go towards Tatis, but sometimes I like to side with Soto. I mean, again, the guy's played in 313 career games. He's already got 69 career home runs, and he's got a .295 career average with a .972 OPS. Not to mention, he's coming off of a year in 2020 where he led the entire MLB in on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS. He had over an 1,100 OPS in 47 games played last year. He had 13 homers and 37 RBIs. If he had played, again, anywhere near the amount that Tatis played last year, he probably would have gotten even closer to his numbers. And not to mention, he's played in way more games than Tatis has in his career, and he's putting up similar numbers, literally similar numbers, and he's doubled the amount of service time that Tatis has had. So I think that Soto is going to be very deserving this year. I really do hope that he can make it to the All-Star game. I think that he should be an All-Star. I would be, again, very shocked if he was not an All-Star. I would be kind of floored, to quite frankly, with you. So I'm going to have to go with, again, Juan Soto being another potential first-time All-Star. But then another guy that I want to select, Randy Arazarina. Randy Arazarina is going to be, I think, an All-Star not just this year, but for many years to come. He's a guy that, again, very similar to Tatis, has not played a whole lot of baseball. He's only played in 42 career games. But in 2020, he came out of nowhere. He played in the playoffs like he had been in the playoffs for many years. And I think that's the wonder of Arazarina, is that he kind of came out of nowhere. He caught everybody off guard. Hits, 10 home runs in the playoffs, double-digit in hits. He sets numerous records for the playoffs in hits, and as a rookie, I mean, the guy literally came out of nowhere. He played 23 games last year during the regular season, 7 homers, 11 RBIs, hit a .281 average, and a 1.022 OPS. That was actually way better than his 2019 OPS, which was still pretty good at an .891 clip. Now, again, he's only played in 42 career games, so he's actually seen less time in the MLB than Fernando Tatis has. So that does, again, bring up, I think, a couple questions of, is he actually all that? Is he actually legitimate? Did he just happen to get really hot at the right time, and that's all we're going to see? But if you look at his career numbers beforehand in St. Louis, and again, he's 26 years old. He's not that old. He's not that old at all. And so as a result, he's somebody that could definitely have a huge career in front of him. And he's on a team that is very well known and is always very good at developing talent in-house, and that's the Rays. And when he was with the Cardinals for a brief stint in 2019, he batted pretty well. Batted 319 games. He had an 891 OPS, like I mentioned. He only had 1 homer and 2 RBIs, but his OPS plus was a 135, and then in 2020 it was a 179. I mean, the guy put up just staggering numbers. And then you look at his postseason batting, and in his career, he's a 358 hitter. A 358 hitter in the playoffs, and that is in part due to having such a good playoffs in 2020, right? I mean, he came out of the wild card batting 500. He went into the ALDS, batted 421. Went into the ALCS, batted 321, and then in the World Series batted 364. So he put together an insane run. Again, 10 homers, he had 14 RBIs, he had 29 total hits, record for a rookie in the postseason. So he's definitely, I think, going to be on my watch list for potential first-time All-Stars this year. So Randy Arazarina makes the list. And then the next one, Dustin May. Dustin May, I think, is going to be an absolute beast when it's all said and done. I mean, the guy is literally 23 years old, and he pumps 100 miles an hour like it's nothing. Everybody's been talking about Jacob Degrom and how he's looked sharper than a tool in a shed right now, and I get it. I do. I mean, the guy does. He is probably the best. He is the best pitcher in baseball. Jacob Degrom is the best pitcher in baseball. But Dustin May, I think, is somebody that we should not forget about. And when he was 21 as a rookie in 2019, yeah, his record wasn't great, 2-3 record. But again, that doesn't, I think, really define, players, especially pitchers, all that much. That just says how much run support they were getting that day from their offense. He had a 3.63 ERA. He worked in 34 2/3 innings in 2019. He had 32 Ks, so just about a strikeout an inning. Pretty solid rate. And then he comes back in 2020. He's got a 2.57 ERA in 12 games, 56 innings of work, and 44 Ks. But in the postseason, that's where things really started to kind of take off for him. I mean, he was putting up some insane numbers. Now, in the World Series, he didn't look that great. He wasn't as lights out as he was in the NLCS. NLCS, he threw a 3.86 ERA in 3 games, 4 2/3 innings. He had some pretty solid outings, 6 total strikeouts. He only gave up 2 earned runs. He only gave up 1 home run in the entire World Series, or in the entire playoffs last year, and that was in the World Series against the Tampa Bay Rays. So I think that May has got a lot of intangibles for being a player that could be really good down the road. I mean, again, he has great upside. He's tall. He's got a great frame in terms of where he releases the ball, where the ball comes out of his hand. He's kind of not necessarily an over-the-top pitcher, but a little bit of a three-quarters guy, throws about 100 miles an hour. He can light it up with the best of them, and I think that's why people need to pay a little bit more attention to him. And not to mention, he's a pitcher that can come out of the bullpen. He can start. I mean, he was coming into relief last year in the playoffs, which I found very interesting. But if you think about it, he'd be an ideal relief candidate because he throws so hard. He can get you out of a 6-inning jam very quickly. And he's got pretty good control, too. That's another thing. Usually when you have young guys that are throwing that hard, it takes a little bit of time for them to figure out the control aspect and being able to be precise and accurate. He's already all that, right? I mean, he has great downward angle on his fastball because of the sheer height that he has in terms of his stature, and also just where he's got long arms, so he's got a long release point. He's got the makings of being a really good pitcher. So I'm going to say he's going to be a first-time All-Star this year. And then my next pitcher, another guy on the Dodgers, Julio Yurius. Yurius, I think, for the last 2 years, he's been pretty sensational. And again, he's been playing since 2016, and he was 19 years old in 2016. So he's got a lot of time under his belt, about 74 games logged. He's a guy that's going to be coming probably out of your bullpen, but he can start, as we see in 2020, where he had 10 starts in the 11 games he played in. He had a 3.2 ERA, 55 innings of work. He had 45 strikeouts. He's somebody that is, again, a very strategic pitcher. I wouldn't say that he's got the heat that Dustin May has. I think Yurius can definitely still pump it, but he's not going to hit 99, 100 consistently like May can. I mean, May can do it time and time again if he really wants to. I mean, he can literally do it pitch after pitch. Yurius is more strategic. he's going to really break you down with a variety of pitches. He's got a wide arsenal of pitches that he likes to use. And so I think that, and again, this is why this Dodgers team is so dangerous. You've got a guy like Yurius coming out of the bullpen or starting. You've got May who can come out of the bullpen or start. So you've got two guys that you can kind of float in and out, right? I mean, if they started and were on a short start on a Monday, you could throw them into relief for an inning or so to get them out of a jam on a Thursday, and you wouldn't be that upset about it, right? I mean, I think that's kind of what they're hoping will become with May and Yurius. I don't know if they'll necessarily do that because you do have to factor in there could be some fears of stress injuries and overusage injuries, whatever they might be. But I think that Yurius is somebody to really watch. I mean, looking at his numbers in 2020 in the playoffs, he was lights out. I mean, he was, I think, their best pitcher by far. Even though Kershaw got all these, recognition for moving up on the all-time career postseason strikeout list, so on and so forth, Yurius was their best pitcher. He was their difference maker. Went 2-0 in the NLCS. He went 1-0 in the NLDS. In the wild card, he got the one win. And then if you also look in the World Series, he had a great ERA, a 2.5 ERA in the NLCS. It was a 1.13. So really gauging it off of just his playoff performance, you could kind of tell how good that he is. And not to mention, again, he's only 24. These guys are young. They've got so much time in front of them that this can clearly be kind of the start to their quick ascension. And I'm really excited to see where Yurius does go, because I think that Yurius is going to be somebody that we're going to hear much more about as time goes on. And again, not to mention, I think that him and May can both be first-time All-Stars this year. So I'm getting into my last three players. I've got two more pitchers and then one more position player. So my first guy, out of the last three, Zach Wheeler. Now, Wheeler, he's a little bit older than the rest of these guys on this list. 30 years old. He's got a little bit more service time under him. He's played since 2013, so about 6 years. Didn't play in 2015 due to an injury. But if you look at his ERA each of the last 3 years, they've all been under 4. 2018, it was a 3.3. 2019, it was a 3.9. 2020, it was a career low at 2.9. And he had a really, really good season. I mean, 71 innings logged, so he was one of the highest innings pitched pitchers in baseball. He had 53 Ks, so not a huge strikeout guy per se, but he's definitely somebody that is going to get, a lot of production on the mound. A 156 ERA +2. He had a 1.169 WHIP, which was actually his second career lowest in his entire career after his 2018 season that he had a 1.124 WHIP. So he's, again, somebody that is definitely, I think, on the up and up for the most part. He's somebody that can definitely have a high strikeout total. I mean, it is very evident from, in 2019 at his career high at 195 strikeouts, only 5 away from reaching the 200 mark. And if you're striking out 200 batters in a season, I mean, you're on my list for being a first-time All-Star without question. Not to mention his home run rate, or his home run percentage as a pitcher was only 1, which was a career low last year. And then not to mention his strikeout percentage was 18.4, which although it is the lowest it's been in his career, but then his walk percentage was also the lowest it's been in his career at 5.6%. So yes, his home runs and walks are going down, which is really good. The strikeout percent is still not probably where you want him. He was in the mid-20s in 2019 at 23.6. He was in the mid-20s in 2018 with 24.1% for a strikeout percentage. So for the most part, I think that he can be a high strikeout guy. It's just whether or not, A, he can stay healthy, and B, if he can get any sort of run support from the Phillies. I think that's another thing that's really kind of, made him suffer a little bit, is just the amount of, the lack of run support that he's had. Looking at some of his records, they're pretty solid. I mean, 2019 he was 11-8. 2018 he was 12-7. But before that, he was 3-7 in 2017. In 2014, he was 11-11. And then in 2013, he was 7-5. So all in all, I think he's going to be a first-time All-Star. I don't think it's as obvious as it is with the other guys, but I definitely think that he's somebody that you need to pay attention to and that could definitely make a case for a first-time All-Star bid. My next guy, somebody who actually came in top 3 in the MVP voting 2 years ago, Marcus Simeon, former Oakland Athletics player, now with the Toronto Blue Jays. I think he can be an All-Star. I think he's got the capabilities of being an All-Star. His career numbers don't really back that up. Prior to 2019, his career high in batting average had been a 257, and that was in 2015, and he played in 155 games. Now, the beauty of Marcus Simeon is that he plays every single game. In 2020, he played in 53 of 60 games. In 2019, he played in all 162 games. 2018, he played in 159 out of 162. So in the last 3 seasons, he's played in easily 70% of the games. Even 80% of the games, I'd give it. But then in 2019, that's where things really took off for the guy. 285 batting average. He had 33 homers, 92 RBIs, and 892 OPS. But here's what's really staggering. He had an 8.9 WAR. He had one of the highest WARs amongst all of infielders in baseball that year. In 2018, that was his previous career high at 4.7, so he pretty much doubled up on his WAR from the season before. Now, he did take a little bit of a step back in 2020, but again, it was a truncated season. We have to take that into consideration, and we have to realize, like, look, guys that were not good in 2020, who knows what would have happened after that 60-game mark. They could have possibly been way better in game 75, game 80, game 85, game 90. We have no idea. And so as a result, I definitely think that it's a little bit unfair to kind of gauge these guys off of their 2020 stats. Although I am doing it for some guys that did play well, it's, again, kind of a small sample size. So you kind of have to take it with what it's worth, obviously. So getting out of Marcus Simeon, getting into the last guy who I think could be a first-time All-Star, and this is probably going to be the biggest stretch on the entire team, and I understand that. I know it probably won't happen because there's just too much talent on this team. But from the situation he just came out of into the situation he just stepped into, I'm very hopeful, and I really do hope that he can be potentially an All-Star this year. Joe Musgrove. Now, if you look at his situation in Pittsburgh, it was not a great situation, but he did have some really good seasons. 2019 had 157 Ks, which is a career high for him. He also had a 4.4 ERA. Now, that is also the second highest in his career. I will give him that. But in 2020, he had a career low 3.8 ERA. So the first time his ERA was below 4. I think that Musgrove could be a guy that is, again, a back-end rotation starter, but somebody that can be the best back-end rotation starter. He was the Pirates' easy 1 or 2 starter. I felt that him or Trevor Williams were always going to be kind of the 1 or 2 options to go to in any sort of situation for the Pirates. Now that he's with the Padres, he's in a situation where it's not going to be all on him. The weight and the kind of pressure is not going to be all on his shoulders. It's going to be divided and divvied up. I think that will allow him to breathe a little bit. It will alleviate some pressure for him. It will allow him to pitch how he knows how to pitch. And I think that he's a guy that, if you look at his ERA when he was in Houston, it was a 4.0 in 2016, his rookie year. It was a 4.7 in 2017, and then his first year in Pittsburgh, it was a 4.0, and then it goes back up to 4.4 in 2019, then it goes down to a 3.8. So it's kind of all up and down. It's all over the place. So I definitely think that he's going to potentially be an All-Star this year, but he is going to be a big stretch coming off a year where he had a career high in ERA plus at 116. The only season he's been above 100. So that's another thing to make note of. But ultimately, I don't think that he's going to have the shot that, say, Fernando Tatis or Soto or Dustin May or Marcus Simeon might have. I think that Musgrove, out of all of these guys, is going to be probably the least likely to make his first All-Star team. But again, I would not be shocked if he was able to sneak in somehow, maybe with a fan vote, whatever it might be. But again, just a couple guys: Fernando Tatis Jr., Juan Soto, Randy Arazarina, Dustin May, Julio Yurius, Zach Wheeler, Marcus Simeon, Joe Musgrove, all guys I think could be first-time All-Stars this year, again, if they continue to play the way they've been playing. But I really don't see any slowing down from a lot of these players. So that will close things out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial, I'll give out an off-season grading of the teams in the AL West and also a grade for the entire division as a whole. It's been a lot of fun so far, but we have a lot more to go, so don't change that channel. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. from news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be, visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again. And in the previous segment, I got right into sharing which players I think could be on their way to their first ever All-Star selections this upcoming season based on their trend and performance in their career and the teams they are on now that could actually help them get more notoriety moving forward. But I want to now get into discussing an off-season grading of the AL West teams but also the entire division as a whole, because there weren't many moves made overall in the division, I feel, across the board. It was actually a very, very lackluster offseason for the AL West, I think, in general. So just running through the teams, obviously Athletics, Astros, Rangers, Angels, and Mariners. And again, I know I have gone through and ranked the different divisions in baseball in a previous episode, and quite frankly, they're one of the worst, if not the worst divisions in baseball. So getting first into the Athletics, a couple major pickups that they had this offseason: Elvis Andrus, Trevor Rosenthal, Mitch Moreland. So all in all, first off, when I kind of look at this team, I notice that they lost a good bit, but then they kind of replaced it a little bit, right? They lost Chris Davis. They lost Marcus Simeon. I think that Simeon was a bigger loss for them than Davis was, because Davis was not performing the way that he was back in 2016, 17, and 18 the last couple years, a couple injuries, just not really performing the way, I think they expected him to, and they had, been normally accustomed to how he was performing. So you kind of go out and you go and get Elvis Andrus. I don't know what to think of Andrus. He hasn't been good in a couple years. He lost his starting shortstop position last year when he was on the Rangers. And he hasn't been that productive. He hasn't been a player that I think really stands out to me as somebody that is going to be a difference maker. And I feel that the Athletics are in an interesting situation because they can actually take advantage of the division they're in, because the Rangers, Angels, and Mariners don't really pose any threat. So all they have to really do is go out and get players that would be enough just to beat the Astros, in my personal opinion. Do I think Andrus is that? No, not really. But I do love the pickup of Trevor Rosenthal, because they did lose Liam Hendriks and they did lose Joakim Soria in the offseason. So those are two big-time arms out of the bullpen that they don't have anymore. And Soria being on the Diamondbacks now, and then you've got Liam Hendriks over with the White Sox. Things are kind of moving around. So you go out and you get Trevor Rosenthal. I like that. I think that Rosenthal fits them very, very well. He was really good last year for both the Royals and the Padres. I believe he only gave up one earned run the entire time that he was with San Diego. And quite frankly, if he was still in San Diego, well, the Padres would be even better than people are already kind of predicting them to be this year. So I like that pickup. And then Mitch Moreland, you kind of replace Chris Davis a little bit with Mitch Moreland in some regards. Simply put, because he's got the ability and the potential to be a big-time power hitter. He can be a big-time power bat in the lineup. I don't think that he's going to do the damage that Chris Davis has done, where he's got 40-plus home runs in a season, but I definitely think that Mitch Moreland can kind of fill that void a little bit. But then also, again, going back to Rosenthal, that was the biggest pickup for them by far. They needed to go out and get him because, again, they already lost Tommy La Stella. They already lost Liam Hendriks. They lost Joakim Soria. They did lose a lot more than they gained, but they did kind of make up for it in the players that they went out and got. So overall, I'm giving the Athletics a B, a nice solid B. I don't think they did anything spectacular. They didn't do anything terrible. They were pretty solid across the board, so I give them a B. Getting into the Astros now. A couple major pickups. Obviously, Jake Odorizzi, because with Framber Valdez going down with, I believe, a season-ending finger injury. I think they're not going to have him come back in 2021, so they went out and signed Odorizzi. To the life of me, I have no idea why or how he was on the market this long still, but that's a different conversation for a different day. And then they re-signed Michael Brantley. They re-signed Lance McCullers. A very quiet offseason in Houston, right? It was very quiet. And after them losing George Springer in free agency, I kind of looked at them and said, you're going to have to really, really, really step it up in the offseason now. I mean, that's a big piece of their lineup. That's, at times, their leadoff hitter, a very powerful leadoff hitter, a focal point during the playoff runs that they've had and continues to be in the playoffs and in the postseason. Not to mention, you look a little bit further down the road, you've got guys like Justin Verlander that are slowly working their way out of their career. You've got guys like Zach Greinke, who's not getting any younger. Carlos Correa, he's going to be a free agent, and who knows if he'll actually re-sign with Houston. So there's a lot of things I feel that they should have braced themselves for, that they did not really do a good job of bracing themselves for. And I think that Odorizzi was simply out of desperation. They needed another arm. And again, I don't know why Odorizzi was on the market for so long, especially, again, I know he's coming off a tough year in 2020, but a lot of players were. A lot of guys were. And he would be an arm, I think, that in a lot of rotations, they would be very happy to have him, right? I mean, he's somebody that in certain teams and on certain teams, he would probably be a really good fourth starter. So I did like that, but I just didn't like anything else they did. They didn't do anything that special. They were very, very plain in what they did in the offseason. So I'm kind of disappointed with them. I don't think that they're going to really do any big-time damage this year. Again, very similar to the Athletics. They can take advantage of the simple fact that, you know, there's not much competition in their division. So as a result, it's a lot easier for, you know, guys like, or teams like the Astros to not have to make many moves and still perform well, because the competitors that they have in their division, they're not very good. They're not that impressive. So I'm going to give the Astros a D. I don't think that I was very unimpressed with what they did. So I'm giving the Astros a D. Now, getting into the Rangers, a couple big-time pickups for them, or at least notable pickups. Mike Foltynewicz, David Dahl, Chris Davis, Raisel Iglesias was another one. All in all, I loved the fact they got Dahl. I think that was really big, and I did like that they got Chris Davis because it's another power bat to kind of bookend with Joey Gallo. I like that. Raisel Iglesias is a nice pickup for them. They definitely need some bullpen pitching, but do we really like Mike Foltynewicz there? I mean, is that really what we want if we're a Texas Rangers fan? I don't think so. I personally am not impressed with Foltynewicz. Again, I've said this many times, and I will continue to say this. He literally had one start last year with the Braves, and then he got sent down right after to their spring training facility for the rest of the season because he imploded in his one start. So I'm kind of sitting there wondering, why in the world would you go out and get a guy that has that kind of track record? He's coming off that kind of season, and he has not been good since about 2017, 2018. I did not like that, but I did like the fact that they get Dahl, because Dahl is somebody that I think could be really good for them. He could shine on this team because, again, they don't have that much, I would say, star power per se, and they don't have that much power in general. And then Chris Davis, he's just going to give them so much more production. He's going to give them so much more home run hitting. It's going to be that much more offensive driven in terms of what their schematics will be as a team and their approach at the plate. Although I will say the deadening of baseballs, that might do a little bit something here and there with Davis. But ultimately, I did really like a couple moves that they made. But again, a couple of them I did not like. Again, Mike Foltynewicz really kind of throws that off for me. I'm not impressed with him at all. And I think that Foltynewicz, in my opinion, we might see him getting shipped off again somewhere at some point or another, because I just don't think that he's got the capabilities of being a really good starter anymore. I think that that ship has sailed, and as a result, it's not coming back. And injuries have already started to hit him a little bit. Now, maybe he has a career revitalization in Texas. I doubt it, though, but who knows? So I'm going to give them a C+. Very average, but a little bit above average. Just a little bit above average, because I think Dahl and Davis really saved them there. Not to mention, they got David Dahl for 1 year, $3.5 million. So if he has a really good deal or a really good year, it could be one of the biggest bargains that the Rangers have ever had in their history, I think. So now getting into the Angels. The Angels are an interesting situation as well. They went out, they traded for Jose Iglesias, they traded for Alex Cobb, they traded for Dexter Fowler, they got some more pitching. You know, they've got some solid pitching, I would say, across the board. I don't know if I necessarily am in love with all of their moves, but I do like them. I think that them getting getting Jose Iglesias, I think that's a wise move. Dexter Fowler was kind of interesting. They needed Iglesias because Andrelton Simmons was going to be on the free agency wire, and he was. He went and got picked up by the Twins. So they needed another infielder to pair well with Anthony Rendon. And then on top of it, you also needed some more pitching. And I'm very curious to watch Alex Cobb because Dylan Bundy is a very similar situation that he's in terms of Dylan Bundy was with the Orioles. He had a really bad year, comes to the Angels, then he has a career season, and so I wonder if that same situation and that same kind of, sequence of events will play out for Alex Cobb as well. Dexter Fowler, I think, is more of a filler guy. And what I mean by that is this. I think with, Joe Adell has a lot of potential in the outfield, and there's a lot of hype around him. There's a lot of promise. There's a lot of talk that he's going to be kind of that new, one of those big-time pieces in the outfield alongside Mike Trout. I think Dexter Fowler is being used in a certain way as, again, kind of a filler. He's somebody that's going to be the bridge between the Angels not having anybody to fill in the outfield right now because Adell is not that, I would say, mature yet. And then once he's able to take over, then they're going to just ship Dexter Fowler off. And he also brings a winning mentality. That's another thing that he brings. I think that Dexter Fowler offensively will not do much. I don't think he's going to produce all that much. Jose Iglesias, though, did have a really good year last year in the 23, 24 games that he played in. It's a small sample size, so we have to also take that into consideration. Is it really worth our while? Is it really going to be that big of a difference for us? And then back to the Alex Cobb thing, I think that there are bright and shiny spots in his career at points, but there are other points where it's like, there's been years where his ERA was well over 4. And again, these guys that are getting picked up by AOS teams, they are benefiting from the fact that there is not much competition across the board. And so as a result, you don't really have to worry about that kind of stuff. So Dexter Fowler might be able to thrive, and same with Jose Iglesias, and same with Alex Cobb. All in all, I'm going to give them a B- on their off-season moves. Again, I don't necessarily hate them. I think that they are very interesting. I think that they were pretty solid across the board. I just think that this Angels team needs to do a little bit more. Every single year I feel like they do enough, but they don't do that extra step. They do a little bit here, but they don't go a little bit further, right? And I think that's kind of been the biggest thing. They went out, they re-signed Max Stassi, which I think is going to be a really good one. And then I also saw that they went out and got Kurt Suzuki. So maybe they're going to use Suzuki and Stassi as kind of a split catcher duties, if you will. I don't know. We'll have to see. But all in all, I'm going to give them a B-. I'm not that disappointed in what they did, but I think that they're definitely going to be, big-time moves down the road. So getting into the last team, the Mariners, it was a quiet offseason in Seattle. It was really quiet. They went out and got James Paxton. I'll give them that. I don't mind that. I think Paxton is somebody that they can use because he brings experience. He's a veteran. And this is the third or fourth youngest team in baseball. Their average age right now is between 26 and 27 years old. So they're really young. And I think that they need somebody to be kind of that, not necessarily glue guy, but that guy that's going to be the veteran that everybody goes to. And he can be the one that pulls everybody together, and he can really rally everybody around each other and say, hey, let's go out and get this W today, or whatever it might be. Not to mention, he can also provide some leadership for those up-and-coming pitchers that they have on their team. And so I like that they went and got Paxton, but they didn't do anything else. Literally nothing else. And so that's why I'm kind of like not totally sold on what they've been doing, because I think that at the same time, they probably already have a lot in the farm system, and they have a lot of players coming up through the system, through the team, through the franchise. And so I think that they're developing a lot of talent. And I think that as time goes on, we're going to start, they might become kind of the Rays. They might become kind of a Rays-esque team where they don't make many crazy moves. They don't try and make some huge splashes. They more so emphasize on developing talent in-house and then getting that talent from the minor league to the major league and really allowing them to take that big step. So I like the idea of them getting James Paxton, but I really wish they went out and did more. All in all, I will give them a C-. So I'll give them a C- for that offseason grade. So just to review real quickly, Athletics, I'm giving them a B, Astros a D, Rangers a C+, Angels a B-, and the Mariners a C-. In all honesty, I was thinking about this after I did the grading. if the Mariners had made one or two more moves, I probably would have given them a better grade than the Rangers, because I feel like they did. I like that addition of having James Paxton. I think that's really, really smart for them, and I think that it's going to really, brighten some things up for them. And so ultimately, I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of these moves for, the Athletics at least, but I'm not a real big fan of the Astros, what they did, and I wish that the Mariners went out and got more, because I think that they could actually be a team that could be pretty good. Again, they've got a lot of youth. They've got a lot of young talent that's coming up, and I think that could be a big-time difference maker for them. So ultimately, the overall grade I'm giving for the AL West, a C+. I'm not that impressed with the division as a whole. I'm never really impressed with the AL West. They're kind of the most boring division, in my opinion. I'm personally kind of like, what is the point of making all these big moves, and then you're not really going to do anything with them. Like the Angels. They've made some big moves in the past, but they don't do anything with those moves. They don't do anything with those players. So I am going to be kind of curious to see, what's going to occur down the road for the AL West. But ultimately, I'm giving the entire division a C+. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around. But stay right there, because we will be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I'll get into a buy it or deny it segment, discussing whether I buy or deny the idea that there will be no more than one team from the championship series from this past playoffs to make it back to the same spot in this year's upcoming playoffs in 2021. Don't go anywhere, everyone, because we have one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup final.
Listen now.
Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you, and in the previous segment, I got into a grading of the offseason moves by the teams in the AL West, as well as a grade for the division as a whole. But I want to wrap up today's show discussing the buy it or deny it of whether I buy or deny the idea that there will be no more than just one team from this past year's championship series in the playoffs that will make it back to the same spot in the playoffs in this year's upcoming postseason. So essentially what I'm saying is, do I buy or deny that one of the four teams, or only just one of the four teams, no more than one of the four teams from this past championship series in the playoffs will repeat and go back to this upcoming year's championship series? So just to review, the AL, we had the Astros and the Rays in a very, very tight, down-to-the-wire series. Then we also had in the NL the Dodgers and the Braves, another kind of tight, down-to-the-wire series. So in all honesty, you kind of have to first look at what these teams added in the offseason. And I know I just came out of a segment where I was absolutely roasting the Astros and what they did. And rightfully so. The Astros, they did not do anything very special. They didn't do anything very spectacular. And so as a result, I don't feel like they're a team that could make it back at all. The Rays, the kind of the same thing. The Braves have made some solid moves, though. I will give them that. The Braves, they added some pieces back that they needed to. Marcell Ozuna coming back. They go out and get Charlie Morton. They go out and get pieces that they definitely need. And the Dodgers, they didn't lose a whole bunch. They didn't do anything crazy other than add Trevor Bauer. But that was probably the biggest add of the entire offseason. So as a result, yeah, they didn't do much else, but they had the biggest splash in the entire offseason. So that's where I kind of go with this. And again, the Astros, Rays, virtually nothing. They did absolutely nothing for their upcoming playoff hopes. I will say that Rays have a lot of young talent. I mean, Wander Franco might be one of the big-time up-and-coming names that we don't even realize he's going to be that good. You know, he might be somebody that could become almost like how, you know, I don't know, he could be the next big thing in baseball. He is that good. So maybe they've got some young talent that they're currently working on and developing and really kind of waiting to show to the MLB world, if you will. And the other thing also that you have to remember in this is what have the other teams in these leagues added, right? The AL, you haven't seen a whole lot of ads. You haven't seen any crazy, you know, ads from anybody. I mean, yeah, the Blue Jays for sure, the White Sox, yes. The Yankees re-signing a couple guys. But other than that, I mean, the Twins maybe, but outside of that, there hasn't been any crazy moves. The NL, on the other hand, that's a different situation because you've seen lots of teams bring back players, re-sign guys, go out and get new guys. Look at what the NL has done. The Mets, they've made themselves a contender now. The Padres have entered that conversation. You could even say maybe the Nationals, with how good that they've added, or how much they've added to their rotation in terms of in terms of their lineup, and also just the pitching that they already have. And then you look at the White Sox and the Blue Jays. There's been other teams in the league that have been able to make adds and been able to kind of put pieces together that they need to put together. And so that's why I'm kind of skeptical about how many teams from this past championship series will be back and returning to the same point in this upcoming playoff. Now, here's another kind of just interesting tidbit just to throw out there in terms of the trends and what the kind of the track record has been in the championship series in the AL and the NL last few years. The Astros, they've been to 4 straight ALCSs. And since 2010, at least one team from the years or from previous years ALCS have been back to the ALCS the following year. So every single year since 2010, there has been a back-to-back ALCS performer. The Rangers did it in 2010 and 2011. The Tigers did it in 2012 and 2013. The Royals did it in 2014, 2015. The Blue Jays 2015 and 2016, and the Astros have done it every single year since 2017. So as a result, there is a trend that's going on in the AL in terms of teams that are coming back and repeating and going back to the championship series. But let's also remember that those teams were keeping a lot intact. They were also adding a lot. During that period of time for the Astros, they were going out and getting certain pieces that they needed to get. Same thing with the Blue Jays and the Royals, Tigers, Rangers, all of these teams, they already had pieces that were already put together. And I feel like, at least on the AL side, there hasn't been that much of a huge adding back, bringing back of players that really are going to have a major impact. And then over on the NLCS side, in the NLCS has actually not had repeat teams in it since the 2017-2018 season, so that was the Dodgers. And the Cubs went back-to-back in 2015-2016, and the Cardinals went to 4 straight from 2011 to 2014. So there hasn't been as much repetitive turnover and kind of recurring turnover, if you will, in the NL as there has been in the AL. So that does kind of make me wonder and scratch my head a little bit and say, okay, are we going to look at these trends very heavily? We'll have to see. I mean, I don't know how heavy I would look into these trends, but it's clear that the AL has kind of been more of recycling through teams, at least going back into the earlier 2010s, but in the later 2010s, there's been, again, one team that's really been kind of the recurring theme. But I think that's going to end. I think out of those 4 teams, I'm going to have to just say outrightly the Astros, they're not going to be back. I don't think that they will be. I don't know if it's just me not being a fan of them or what, but I just don't think that they have the pieces that they need to go back and repeat. They are a shell of their former selves, and that is without question a fact. Now, the Dodgers have this is an interesting one. The Dodgers have much more competition to go up against, and that is true. You've got the Mets to deal with, and you've got the Padres, and I feel like the Rays and the Astros, they don't throw me as teams that can make a full season push also. I think that the Dodgers have the depth, the talent, the ability to go the entire season, to put together a huge season run, and so that's why I'm definitely very curious about the Dodgers. The Braves are an interesting case, and here is why. The Braves were actually really good last year. They were really, really good, and I do wonder if they are kind of just, again, a beneficiary of just that 60-game season. Freddie Freeman came out really hot. Marcell Ozuna came out really hot. The entire team came out really hot. And they were really just one game away from the World Series. They were one veteran pitcher away from going to the World Series. And that's another thing to kind of pay attention to, is that they added the pieces that they needed to add. The Dodgers didn't need to add Bauer, but they did because they knew that it would make them that much better. The Braves needed to go out, and they needed to add guys like Morton. They needed that extra arm. They needed to go back out and re-sign Marcell Ozuna. The Astros, they let George Springer go. The Rays, they've traded away Blake Snell and Tyler Glasnow, and they've upgraded with Michael Wacha and Chris Archer, who neither one of them are anywhere close to what I didn't mean Tyler Glasnow. I meant Blake Snell and Charlie Morton. Neither one of Chris Archer or Michael Wacha are anywhere near what Charlie Morton and Blake Snell have been for the Rays. And so you kind of see a little bit of a downgrade there with the pitching. And so you have to kind of pay attention a little bit to that, and also what teams are more likely to make a full season push. The Dodgers, they're able to play strong throughout an entire season's duration. Other teams, you can see kind of quick bursts of speed. They slow down, they go back up really hard and really aggressive, and they go on a 5-game winning streak, and then they dip back down. The Dodgers are pretty steady. They kind of go up, and they stay steady, and they go up, and they stay. They're very, very meticulous with how they go about things. You also have to kind of look at what players were also added and taken away from teams in the previous season. And then also the fact that there was 162 games that are normally being played, and last year there's only 60. So that's going to also factor into things, right? I think that the Rays, they probably would not have made the World Series last year if it was a full season. I'm going to go ahead and say that right now. And so they're another team that I don't think is going to, if anything, make it anywhere near the ALCS next year. I really don't think that. I definitely think that this is going to be a season where we will have, if not the entire championship series completely different, at least 3 of the 4 teams being completely different. I definitely believe that. And I think that there will, again, I mean, let's face it, right? The amount of talent that there is now in the league, and the amount of widespread talent that there is too, it is even the playing field now. There's not necessarily this huge top-heavy feel that there usually is in baseball, I feel. You've got now teams like the Mets and the White Sox and the Blue Jays and the Nationals and the Padres. You even have teams like maybe the Twins that could make some noise. The Yankees, they're always right there. These teams are much more even than it was the last few years where it's been the Dodgers, the Astros, the Yankees, the Red Sox, and that's about it, and the Cubs for a little bit. But now you've got other teams that are getting in the mix. And there's other guys that are getting involved, and there's players that are going to other teams that I think could fit better in certain situations and that could have a better impact on those teams. And not to mention, again, we have to factor in COVID in all of this, because I feel like at some point or another this season there could be a team that sees a big-time layoff because of COVID, that it could definitely set some teams back. And, I hate to have to use that as kind of an aspect, but it's true because of just the situation that we're all in right now. And obviously with the vaccine, things should be getting better sooner rather than later. They are getting better from what I hear. But there's going to be a period of time in the season where there might be a team that's not playing for a whole week, and that could set them back. And so you kind of have to factor that in also. And I just feel like the Rays, they're not the team that can go all the way. They're not a team that it's built to sustain an entire 162-game season and be a top-tier team. They've shown it before. I'm not saying that they haven't shown it before, but I just don't know if that, with all of the talent that there is now in the league and how widespread it is, and how there are other teams getting involved and getting in the mix, I don't think that the Rays have risen up to that same occasion as, say, a team like the Padres. I know it's totally different payrolls. I understand that. But at the same time, the Rays can clearly go out and trade for guys that can go out and make moves, and they're not doing that. And the Astros, the same thing. I feel like they need to be a little bit more aggressive because I think, the Astros, let's face it, they've got Bregman and they've got Altuve on contract for a little while. And I think if they had gone out and gotten some better pitching, I know that Framber Valdez getting injured was not in their blueprint at all. And, now you got Odorizzi. We'll see how he does. Verlander, he's still on the 60-day IL, if I'm not mistaken. So there's a lot of things that the Astros, I think, missed out on the offseason. And so, in all honesty, ultimately, with this claim, I'm going to have to buy it. I really don't see any more than just one team from this past year's championship series going back and repeating, and I think that team's going to be in the NL. I think it's either going to be the Dodgers or the Braves. But it's going to be so much harder for a team in the NL to get out of the NL and into the championship series as it will be for teams in the AL. So that's why I would not be shocked if a team like the Astros maybe slide their way in, or the Rays, because the competition, the talent, it's not nearly as heavy, I would say, as it is in the NL now. We have seen an increase in the NL, I would say, and we've seen a definite increase and a drastic increase in that talent going towards the NL East. And that's going to be a division to watch this year, because I think that there's going to be some teams coming out of that that are going to make a ton of noise in the playoffs and a ton of noise throughout the entire season. And then, again, not to mention, these other teams, they've gone out and they've made those ads that these, Astros Rays that they could not do. They couldn't do that. And so as a result, I kind of have to look at it as, okay, who added what? What other teams are getting good? What other teams are getting involved? Who is a team, or which team is more sustained or much more sustainable to go an entire full season as opposed to just 60 games? I mean, there's a lot of factors in this. So, again, ultimately, I'm going to have to buy it because I just don't see I don't see any more than just one team making it to the championship series next year. I think that we are going to definitely have a case where we will have, I think there's a higher likelihood of the entire championship series being completely different. Maybe not even the Dodgers make it back. I would say the Dodgers or the Braves would be my two teams to pick from that kind of four pool of teams to decide which one is going to be coming back to the championship series next year. I would definitely have to go, without question, with the Dodgers. And then the Braves are a close second. But the Astros and the Rays, I don't see it. And I really hate to say that because I love how in what the Rays have done in the last few years. I love that their entire front management mindset and what they've been doing. And obviously, I'm not a fan of how the Astros have handled things, but they've also been good at building a good team and putting together talented players. But I just don't think that they did enough this offseason to really make themselves big-time playoff contenders, to be big-time World Series contenders. And so that's why I kind of wonder. Now, if, Blake Snell doesn't get traded, if Charlie Morton doesn't get traded, that might be a different situation. It might be a different case. If the Astros go out and add maybe another outfielder to replace Springer, or maybe they go out and get another, a better option in a pitcher, whatever it might be, I would maybe sit and think about it a little bit more. But ultimately, I just don't think that these teams that were in the championship series this past year are going to be able to come back in the same form that they were in this year and also do it over an entire 162-game season. Think about it. They were stopping after 60 games. That's not even the All-Star break. You still have over 100 games left to play. So as a result, what team is going to be able to sustain that? It's going to be the teams that have the most amount of talent across the board, where if one guy's not playing well, the other guy can step up, or they've got somebody on the bench that can replace that guy if he gets injured, whatever it might be. The team that has the much more versatile team and more widespread talent, that's who's going to probably have the best chance at coming back next year. And I think that's the Dodgers. I think that they are, again, the only one. So I'm definitely going to buy this claim that there will be just no more than one team from this past year's championship series returning back into this upcoming year's championship series in the playoffs. But we'll have to see. Again, we've got a big baseball season ahead of us. Like I keep mentioning, spring training is right around the corner. Opening day is right around the corner. We are almost there, folks. We have waited this long. We have had probably one of the, I feel like this offseason has been so long and slow, and now we're going to have baseball back, and it is going to feel so good to have some live action, regular season baseball, not to mention it'll be on TV, and there's going to be quite a bit of sports on TV, so I hope everybody's got a nice comfy chair at home. But anyways, folks, that's going to wrap it up for us here today. Thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us out. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd also really appreciate that. So, folks, until next time, thanks so much for joining today, and I will be with all of you next time.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.